Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us for another episode of the NYALPA podcast. I'm so glad you're joining us for these conversations, highlighting leaders and experts in multilingual learner education across the country to help us put policy into practice. And today, I'm so excited to welcome Julie Sugarman, who serves on the NYALPA board as the co-chair of the Advancing Multilingual Learner Policy and Practice Committee. So Julie, thank you so much for being here today. I'm super excited for this conversation.
My pleasure. I'm looking forward to it too.
So to start us off, if you had a couple minutes to just share with our listeners why they should join NYALPA, what would you say to them?
Now more than ever, I think it's so important for people to be able to share information and find out what's going on nationally and in the states, because we don't have a strong office in the Department of Education at the moment. It's really important for us to take the reins and to be able to share information with SEA and LEA folks, sharing ideas and strategies. And, in my role as explaining a lot of what's going on at the national level, that's really the special magic of NYALPA, is bringing all those people together to share all those ideas.
I absolutely agree. I think now more than ever, like you said, as things are shifting with the federal landscape, our educators who are in the classroom, to district leaders, to state leaders, maybe don't know where to turn to try to get guidance and advice. And they're trying to interpret, changes in, federal policy and guidance documents. And so I think NYALPA has really stepped up to take on a support role for folks who maybe, are looking for some of that leadership that we used to look for from the U.S. Department of Education. So I absolutely agree. If you're not currently a member, you definitely need to be, just to have that extra layer of support.
Absolutely.
So can you share a little bit about your background and then your work within NYALPA and beyond? How does it connect to multilingual learner education?
Sure. I actually started my career at the Center for Applied Linguistics. I was there for 15 years, and I was doing research on two-way immersion to begin with, and then got very interested in program evaluation, and ended up doing a lot of work in program evaluation of various types of programs for language learners, and then came here to the Migration Policy Institute. I've been here for almost 11 years, and it's just been a fascinating time to be working in policy. And to be bringing all these constituencies together around things that we all feel really strongly about immigrant students and English learners, and what it means to have a public education system. All of these sort of really important questions for our society have been really front and center for the last 10 years that I've been here.
Yeah. So when you think about the last decade or maybe even 15 years, as you've gotten, immersed into the policy scene, if you were to put together like a highlight reel of the good, the bad, and the ugly around policies over the last 10 to 15 years, what would pop out as like those little things on your timeline or things that really stick out to you as really important, whether important in a good way, important in a not so good way for our multilingual learners?
The first thing that pops into mind is really the 2015 Dear Colleague letter as being both a highlight and a sadness when it was rescinded last year. I think having all that information in one place about what are the obligations of schools, what can they do, what are the legal obligations behind that. I think all of the information that we've been getting at the federal level has really centered us on this question of access to mainstream content, access to the grade level curriculum. Everything. It's been there all along. The federal definition of education, the way that English language proficiency standards align with English language arts and math, all of those things sort of all have been there. But all of these pieces of guidance that we've been getting for the last 10 years or so have really sharpened that focus, and I think have really given a center to the world of policy and the world of practice.
I absolutely agree. And I was actually at the Iowa Department of Education in 2015, leading the Title III work there when the Dear Colleague letter came out. And I cannot tell you how excited all of us as state directors were when that letter was released and that guidance document. We started creating entire modules of training around the letter. So we had a whole series of training that we developed just to sort of put the implementation suggestions in the letter into practice and training. So that letter became I mean, it was a roadmap for all of us. And something that you said about just how, sad people were and disappointed when, it got the watermark on it, if, rescinded. I think something that's so important that I really hope our listeners truly understand is that letter and the guidance in the letter still rings true, whether there's a rescinded watermark on it, whether the federal government is putting resources towards supporting implementation and sort of following up on the letter itself as far as what districts are doing. I really hope people understand that hasn't changed the laws that letter is based on. It hasn't changed that that's the best practice when it comes to thinking about your systems and your programs. So what would you like to say to our listeners about just, that letter, even though it's rescinded, about the usefulness of what's in the content of the letter?
Yeah, that letter just really spells out, again, it's the foundation of the work that we do, not because we're told to by the law, but because it's best practice, and because these are the things that over decades, practitioners and lawyers who do the observations for the Department of Justice have seen. This is what it really takes to provide access to students and to their families, because a lot of it has to do with family involvement as well. So the law is still the law. You still can be held accountable. In a new administration, there may be a return to this kind of oversight. And if you've taken apart your programs, you're going to be in trouble because you are still the law is still there, and a future administration could decide to restart enforcement on it. So, continuing a program that provides the services is a lot easier than taking it apart and having to restart it. And it dovetails really well with ESSA, where a lot of those ideas are really systematized. So, if you want to be in aligned with ESSA as well, those are sort of the foundational principles for things that allow you to have a statewide system for identification, for example, and for that to be really coherent and to make sense and align with other processes like grading or placement or other things.
Absolutely. So from your perspective, what are some of the most important shifts or challenges you're seeing right now, like today in multilingual learner education?
Right now, I think what we're seeing is a bifurcation where the states and districts that really are progressive and want to move forward and do really innovative things are doing that. They're putting new requirements into law or regulation so that everybody is clear on what the standards are. They're ramping up bilingual programs. They're providing teacher training and bilingual teacher pathways, and doing all of that. And then on the other end, there's the places that never wanted to serve these students, and they're taking what's happening now as an excuse to take apart their programs or to say they don't matter or to just not provide support or show that those programs are important. So I think it is sort of on both ends. We're really seeing this movement to a lot of really great exemplar programs, but then a lot of places that we're very worried about. Especially in places with lower enrollment of English learners, where they feel like they can kind of hide what they're doing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that's really disheartening and just really sad to think about places in the country where our kids are coming to school and many times they're afraid to show up. They don't know if they're going to be safe leaving their homes. Their parents don't know if they're safe going to work. And to think that the schools aren't the place where that just the humanity of the best of what we have to offer, like just the human rights element, is just not there for the kids. And I don't understand how we can be in education and, we can sleep at night knowing that we have a group of students who are coming and they don't feel safe in our schools. They don't feel safe in our communities, and we're not doing something about that.
And it's interesting because, a lot of us that are doing this work feel very passionately
Oh yeah.
about these students and these communities. And we want to do this again, like you said, for the humanity reason. But, I think to appeal to people who maybe aren't in that boat, these are the things that work. We know that
Hmm.
family engagement works. We know that having a safe and welcoming environment works. There was even research done on these safe zone policies that spell out we won't let ICE into our campus, and we have help available if you need it from counselors. These policies actually have academic positive effects. So, all of these things that people might not agree with in principle, all educators have a responsibility to educate children, and we know that these practices and these things that aren't specifically instructional, but about the educational environment, we know that they're effective for helping kids be successful in their academics.
Hmm. So when you think about teachers in classrooms and thinking about just, trying to do the right thing, sometimes in spite of the noise around you and the policies that are changing and shifting, what advice do you have for teachers who, again, they're trying to do everything that they can amidst a shifting landscape in their communities and their school boards? What kind of advice would you have for them?
Yeah, right now, teachers really need to take advantage of the communities that they have. Teachers are so stressed. There's
Yeah.
so much trauma that they feel about the trauma happening to families and communities. And some of them are immigrants themselves and are having issues around, the same issues that their
Yeah.
students are having. So having a community to rely on, making sure that, administrators really understand the work that you're doing and support the whole school coming together to support these students. It's not enough to sort of marshal those personal resources. I mean, that's obviously the first step is to work with general education teachers and talk to them about who the kids are and what is needed and all of that. But to really make sure that the administrators are behind that effort as well is such a key for making sure that the whole school is taking care of the kids and families.
So you mentioned earlier this idea that as we sort of, the policy shift to returning, you know, power and funding to the states. What are some things you're seeing states do? Because I know of some of the new legislation. States are finishing their legislative sessions or trying to wrap some things up. So, what are some of the more innovative, supportive things you're seeing in states around legislation that they're implementing to try to, like you mentioned, just set the stage for expectations around multilingual learner support in states who maybe are no longer looking to the federal level for that type of legislation or guidance?
Yeah, there's been a number of states that have put Plyler protections into place. Illinois, I believe, did that. Massachusetts. I know Vermont was looking at perhaps doing that. So, those sort of very basic protections that we thought we had from the federal government are things that states can do. There's also states putting more of the practices, more of the expectations they have in legislation. Michigan was one of them, and California has been working on the bilingual teacher pipeline. So yeah, there's a lot of states that are really seeing their stepping up in their role of not just sort of having a guidance document that's on a website somewhere, but putting it into regulations and putting it into law and making sure that it is systematic and that it will live past the one person who came up with the idea, and will really live within the state and the LEAs.
Yeah. And in some ways, that might be a wonderful byproduct of what's happening right now is that more and more states have these laws on their own books and it doesn't have so many like spaces and gaps between policy and practice in our states when you start thinking about, having to go from the federal level down into the classroom. So when you do think about sort of bridging the gap between policy and classroom practice, do you have some, I guess, just ideas or advice for educators and leaders to be able to sort of bridge that gap between some of the policies and the practices that they're implementing?
I think people understand the basics of the policies, but I think people don't necessarily see sort of how it all kind of works together. And the civil rights framework is a different kind of a framework than the assets-based framework. So with civil rights, you're looking at harm and barriers and things that are going wrong and deficits. And we don't like to talk about that in the English learner field because we like to talk about what the students bring and their assets and the pedagogical reality of building on what is there, and that is absolutely appropriate. But I think people do have to understand sort of where these federal protections lie and how critically important they are. That that not every place is going to be sort of moving forward on that journey on their own. They have to be told that they need to do it or else. So having all of those guidelines has been really critical for making sure that all students, even if they're the only English learner in the whole district,
Yes.
every student gets those services and has access to the same opportunities as all other students.
Absolutely. So how does NIALPA help bring this work together? When you think about NIALPA and the focus on research, policy, and practice, how does NIALPA bridge that in meaningful ways?
I think our committee, the Advancing Multilingual Policy and Practice Committee, has been working really hard to make sure that our members are understanding what's going on, but also we've been talking about how can we help the field? How can we provide more information? We do have a couple resources on our website, one being talking points for talking to state leaders about these issues. And so we really are, it's a two-way street. It's that we're providing information and people are hearing information they need, but we're also getting information from them. I work in a national context, and I'm able to hear from NELPA members about what they need and what's going wrong and what's going right. And I take that to meetings with other leaders. So it's a really important sort of two-way street with especially the folks in my position who do work on policy at the state or national level.
Hmm. I think that's a good reminder, just that, all of us should be, talking to one another. If we see something, say something, share what's working, share what's not working. Because sometimes I think we maybe feel helpless, and when things are overwhelming, we get a little hopeless,
Yeah.
to the point of like as things are changing. But we have to stay strong and be willing to continue to speak up when we see something that's not right, and to celebrate when we see something that's working, and to just make sure that we're sharing all of those ideas across our states and across districts. So I think NELP is a great place to bring all of that together and to be able to
It's
have a
so
space.
Yeah, it's so easy to feel isolated and
It
to feel
is. Mm-hmm.
something terrible is happening and nobody's
Yeah.
doing anything about it.
Mm-hmm.
And so come to NELPA and you'll hear about the people that are doing things about it at the
Yeah.
state and federal level.
Absolutely. So as we wrap up, if you could leave our listeners with one piece of advice, what would it be?
I would say ask questions. I'm a person who people look to for answers, but I am asking a ton of questions right now. And even in the last couple of days, I have gone down deep rabbit holes on new pieces of information. The Department of Education Organization Act, which I was aware of but had never read. We really need details, and we really need to understand the limits of these laws. What in some cases they're very strong and provide great protections, and in some cases they're not. And I think asking questions, finding out what who can answer questions about the policy, talking to state leaders to make sure that the state leaders are helping districts understand those policies. Yeah, just communication is an incredibly important thing right now.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I just want to say thank you so much for sharing your perspective, helping us think more broadly about the systems that shape our collective work. And then I want to just say thank you to all of our NIALPA podcast listeners. We hope that today's conversation has sparked some ideas that you can implement in your local context to navigate the policy to practice gap. And be sure to stay connected with NIALPA and continue learning alongside this incredible community. Thanks so much, Julie.
Thank you.